wearing my feature presentation hat because this episode was a movie. Yeah. Hi, I'm Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Season 2, Episode 5 of Interview with the Vampire, entitled Don't Be Afraid, Just Start the Tape. So we're opening up. We are now heading to San Francisco, and we know that because the title card is different. I like that it changes when we're kind of going to be in one location for an extended period of time for an episode. It's just those little details that add just a little touch to the show. But let's just get into it. So the episode opens up with Louis and Armand making goo eyes at each other and just being like, we met a kind of dreamy balance after we had this conversation on the bench in Paris, and like they established their little dom sub dynamic, and they're just like, and it was just really smooth sailing from there. Things were awesome. But while that's happening, Daniel's kind of starting to we're getting the old Daniel back, Instigator Queen Daniel back, where he says something to Louis about like, oh, you use language as a chicken exit on a roller coaster, like you're circling something and you are not diving into it. Like, what is that thing? What are you avoiding talking about? And literally it reminiscent of episode 1 and 2, Armand immediately swoops in and is just like, well, Louis is just also probably tired too. He just needs his rest. Like, baby needs her nap. Like, that's that's the vibe that it gave in that moment. I was like, oh, okay, weird, yeah. But while all that's happening, I keep calling him real Rashid. Rashid brings in this guy named Malik Malik, and he's like wearing these like super thick, almost like Bret Hart style glasses, and like very obviously like crypto bro or something of the other. Like, he's not like a great guy, and so he comes in, he's just like, oi, who are you? And Armand is just like, oh, like, shall we take this to the living room? Like, he's there for Armand. Like, that's the reason why he's there. And basically Louis explains that like Armand doesn't feed all that often, but when he does, he likes to have a little chase. So if the guy makes it to this certain location, by the time the sun goes down, like, he gets a ridiculous amount of crypto that would make him super duper rich. I literally wrote down, Armand is a crypto bro. It just gets worse. And then the next line, when Louis mentions that basically he kills people who do like kind of nefarious things, like the same thing that the Coven did with the Lacroix family in episode 2. And then the next line I put was like, well, he kills crypto bros, redeemed temporarily. So Armand goes off basically and does that. And so that just leaves Louis and Daniel. And Daniel takes this opportunity to basically get to the bottom of what we saw at the end of episode 4, which is him going through the files that the Talamasca has given to him, like all of this surveillance that they had done on the interview that he had with Louis back in 1973. He's done some digging. Now he's ready to ask Louis basically, what's up? Like, what happened between us? So Daniel remembers, he's just like, I remember the first time that we met, like, Armand had to like pull you off of me, and Louis is like, yeah, whatever. And Daniel's like, Armand is pretty old and has killed quite a bit. Like, he doesn't have this aversion to killing humans like you do, and yet he spared my life. Why is that? And then Louis goes into this kind of very robotic, canned response.
Armand could see I was partial to you. Armand preserves my happiness, even when I don't or can't. He had a hunch you might prove fruitful in later times.
Okay, sure. Let's go with that.
Let's put a pin in that. Remember that. That's going to come up a little bit later on. But basically, they start to go back to 1973, Louis and Daniel. And Daniel is basically, he is now circling the topic. He's just like, okay, like, did we, hook up? You could tell me. I'm trying to remember my queer backstory. It's all coming back to me now. Did we hook up? And then they just do like a jazzy like crossfade to San Francisco to Daniel and Louis first meeting. So Daniel and Louis arrive at this apartment, and Louis is like, you know, smooth Casanova with Daniel, and like Daniel, if you recall, this is basically taking place immediately after they leave Polynesian Mary's, and they go back to Louis' place. Like Louis paid for the drinks, he did that. Like Daniel's trying to get to the bottom of like, why me? Like, what is it about me that drew you to me? What is it about me that has me in this predicament in present day? Like, what is it? So we see them, and like Louis is opening up the bedroom and like showing Daniel his coffin, and and Daniel's like, yeah, like I'm into countercultures. Like, sure. Like he's fully of the mind that like, oh, like this is a bit, like this is just a guy who thinks he's a vampire. He's not an actual vampire. It is what it is. But it's also, it could be something else. Like, yeah, we could do this interview, or we could do something else. Who knows? So then Louis opens up a briefcase full of drugs. And so they start doing that. And Daniel is doing, you know, his drugs while Louis is not. And Louis is talking about like how like, oh, you know, cocaine is a fun boy's drug. I'm not fun. Now he's brooding. But Daniel's like, I like that. I like when you get all dark and real. And Daniel's thinking, okay, now's the time for us to hook up. And he like takes off his shirt and everything. And he's like, now is the time for me to fulfill the social contract, alluding to the fact that Daniel has done this maybe a couple other times with other guys. Like they give him drugs, you know, he has sex with them, that type of thing. And Louis is like, do you conduct all your interviews with your shirt off? And I was like, ooh, okay. Whoa. It's like, God, you did not have to embarrass that man like that. And like he kind of rejects him. But that's kind of Louis' way. Like Louis will miss Lily someone at the drop of a dime. And he is like, you know, like, we're doing this interview, babe. Like, I gave you the drugs. The exchange is for me to be able to blab on tape for a couple of hours. Like, we're not about to hook up. Like, that's not my bag. That's not what we're doing. But there is something about Daniel that Louis feels comfortable with. Like, he wants to tell his story. And Louis and him kind of go, you know, back and forth and kind of have a bit of an exchange in present day. And, you know, this is at this point, Daniel kind of faux starts the interview. Like he's thinking like, oh, like, you know, like you're a vampire. How long have you been a vampire? Blah, 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 blah. Like you really believe that you're this vampire. And Louis shows him like, no, I am very much so. I'm a vampire. Like it's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. Like I am a vampiro. So there's that. So Louis bares his teeth and shows Daniel that he is a vamp. Like he jumps, like I think Daniel's like in the kitchen and Louis like jumps over the kitchen like counter and like is like and there's a specific way that Louis bares his teeth that's like he always like preens his tongue with it too. It just is very interesting. It has nothing to do with the story. I just thought that it was just very interesting that Jacob Anderson, like, that was just like a choice that he had for Louis to bare his teeth in that way. But Louis reveals himself to be a vampire to Daniel. Daniel now is high as hell and scared as fuck. Like he's terrified. They start the interview for realsies this time, and Daniel is like he like takes some coke and like puts it in his gums and then like shakily like lights a cigarette, and he's petrified. And they got to present day, and you know Louis is just like, you were terrified, Daniel. And Daniel like bites back at him and is just like, you were lonely, Louis. Like we needed each other in this moment. And it really struck me in these scenes because Louis keeps referring to Daniel as boy. He was just like, you know, oh, that's an astute observation, boy, or like whatever. Like he keeps referring to Daniel as boy. And I think a part of the kind of cornucopia that makes up Louis as a character. He's got a lot of varieties within him. But a part of what makes up Louis is, I think, in this moment, is him exercising a bit of power over Daniel, because Louis doesn't have power over many individuals in his life when we think about it. Like, he could never really have power over Lestat for a multitude of reasons. For vampiric reasons, Lestat is older than him. Lestat is his maker. Like, there are some conventions inherently baked into their dynamic where they're never going to be equal in power in that dynamic. Same goes for Armand to the nth degree. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a ton of people he can exercise a real sense of power over. But with humans, as much as he is obsessed with humanity, he doesn't fear humans. Like, he really doesn't have this sense of like, oh, I need to cower to them. Like, he's like, no, the quite the contrary. They need to cower to me. So it felt like that boy thing that he kept doing was like as if to be like, I've got a sense of power over you. And the use of boy specifically, like especially in the era and place where Louis came from, I feel like is pretty like prominent to note, because him using boy when he would have been growing up and where he lived in the South in the early 1900s, boy would have been a term thrown at Louis to, number one, like demean him and bring him down to a level lower than where he might have been. So if he's talking to another man, like a white man who is in and around the same age as him, that white man might lob the word boy at him to make it feel like you're inferior to me, like off rip. And it's also a term that was used to instill both like degradation and also fear. So I feel like Louis is remembering those times of when that word was lobbed at him to, degrade him and instill him with fear. And he's doing the same thing with Daniel, which is very, very interesting. I was just like, like, why does he keep calling him boy? And I think that might be why. Louis tells his story from the beginning. It's a lot of Lestat. It's mostly Lestat. It's pretty much all Lestat. So he's just talking, like he's ragging on Lestat. He's like, for all of his love of music and this and that, like he played music with not an iota of feeling. Like he's in his mind thinking he's ragging on Lestat. Now, in this moment, Louis is very much so a person who just got out of a relationship with someone, but they're not done with that person. Yeah, they can move on to someone else, but they can still very much so not be done with their ex. This is Louis in that moment. I think Louis, because when him and Armand later in the episode are talking about how Louis won't stop talking about Lestat, he is just like, but I talked trash about him the whole time. Louis is not wrapping his head around the fact that he's just like, Lestat is still taking up a lot of space in your mind, and he can't really help it either. Like the situation that he got out of with Lestat, where Lestat essentially isolated him from pretty much everybody else and wanted him to be his end all be all, but then also not be his end all be all in a way. Like it made it to where all that Louis kind of has on his mind at any given moment is Lestat, right? So like he can't help it, but that is very much so the case. There's still a bit of you that will forever be tethered to this guy. You can't let it go, Louis. You just can't. The sun begins to rise because Louis has been talking for hours to Daniel about his story, and he gets to the part where Claudia goes off for the second time, I think. And this is when like Lestat goes and gets her off of the train and all that stuff. And he's talking about, and I just sat on that bench and I sat for hours and hours. And he's kind of going into his usual Louis spiel. And Daniel's just like, at one point he says like, I'm with Claudia, get off that bench, brother. He's just like, you got to start your life, man. Like you got to get up, like why are you wasting eternal life on a bench? Go forth and I don't know, kill, I guess. Be a vampire. And he gets to the point, Daniel gets to the point where he's just like essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, he's essentially just like, Louis, come on, man, you gotta get up. Like, most people would kill to be in this position. Like, you gotta do something, man. You don't even know the meaning of your own story. Like, you're just sitting here bitching and moaning. Like, it could be worse. And this sets Louis off because he's just like, were you not listening to anything I was saying? And then in turn, Daniel is just like, like, I could be what you need. Like, I can be your Lestat, your Claudia, but better. Insane statement to say to Louis, but he says it. You need a companion like me. Like, turn me. Like, I won't, you know, take advantage of the gift, pretty much. Like, he's like, please turn me into a vampire. Like, I want this. I feel like I could be good for you in eternal life. Like, give it to me, please. Show me to me, Rachel. So this is setting Louis off, and Louis then just at Daniel. He just goes and attacks him, takes a chunk out of his neck. So then we cut back to present day, and Daniel then shows Louis, like, that's essentially where both of their memories stop to a certain degree. And he then shows Louis, he doesn't say that this is from the Talamasca, but he says, like, oh, I apparently did have some interviews from that first time that we met, because in season 1, you remember, Daniel brings the kind of hoard of tapes, and he throws it into the trash, basically to be like a symbolic thing of like, we're starting anew. Like, that interview didn't count. There was a lot of stuff going on. You attacked me. That wasn't cool. But we're starting this interview clean slate, starting over. This is the real story. And then Louise sets the tapes on fire. But Daniel has the recovered tape from, I'm assuming that the Talamasca did while they were doing surveillance on him. And so he shows Louis, and he's just like, our memory stopped there, but the tape still kept going. This is all that we missed. And so essentially all that was missed, or all of that was not remembered by either Daniel or Louis, was Armand coming in and basically him and Louis start going at it. Him and Louis get into it. Louis is now like high. Like, he's very, very high. Armand comes in, he's just like, I'm always cleaning up your messes. Like, I'm always doing this for you. I'm always doing that for you. Like, this is my lot in life, to clean up the messes of Louis Dupont du Lac. And then Louis just gets into being like, you are boring, and you are dull and boring, and it feels like I'm being suffocated by the world's beigest pillow. Like, he starts laying into Armand and just being like, the life that we live, this life that we're living here, incredibly boring. Like, it is insufferable to be around you sometimes. And I was like, oh no, that's bad. I tried to, as best as I could, beat for beat, write down what their argument was. So it begins by Armand throwing the jab that he always has to clean up Louis' messes. And this is partially something that Armand did to himself in a way too. Like, in Armand's never-ending quest for real love and loyalty and everything, like, there's this certain sense of servitude that he's really just used to, and he always finds himself going, I think, above and beyond in a way that Louis might not have ever asked for. Like, I think everything that Armand did with regards to the coven and all of this stuff, like, Louis never asked him to really do that. Armand just did it because he thought that would win him the love of Louis, when I think in a realistic scenario, Armand might have still gotten the love of Louis for a lot less. Like I said in the last episode, Armand was doing wifey duties and was not even a girlfriend. You know what I mean? Like, ease up, Then Louis comes back and throws the punch that Armand is boring, and that he had more fun with Daniel in those 10 hours than he's had with Armand in the entirety of their relationship. Ouchie. That hurts. That would hurt. So then at one point, Armand kind of gives him a look like he's upset. And Louis is just like, oh, like there goes that look. Like, what type of Armand am I gonna get? Is he gonna lick my boots, or is he gonna chop my hands off? Like, am I gonna get the gremlin, or am I gonna get the good nurse? Like, what am I gonna get today? Talking about Armand's kind of inconsistencies, and also his I think Louis is cognizant of the fact that like Armand still does exercise a lot of power. Like the whole Matra like thing that they have going on is not really consistent. Armand is very much playing the role, but he still has a lot more power than Louis will ever have in their dynamic. And Louis is kind of calling that out, and he's just like, oh, what am I gonna get today? Am I gonna get, you cowering down, or are you gonna get, or am I gonna get you coming at me again? Like, what's the dealio? Like, what's gonna happen? And so I was like, ooh, ooh, wowzers. And then it gets worse. This is the first time Armand acts like, at least we hear him verbalize his disdain for Louis' obsession with humanity, and he's just mimicking him and being like, oh, my life is so hard, it's just so hard to kill humans. I can feel their emotions when I drain them. Like, he's kind of getting at Louis in the way that literally every other vampire has, with Louis being like, you are a killer, Louis. Like, I'm sorry, that's just kind of where we're at right now. Like, you are a killer. You may not want to be a killer, but you are a killer, so you need to remember that. And then the blows start coming in. Armand goes at him and is just like not making fun. He's mocking him in his accent. They're both doing this in each other's accents. And that's what adds a little layer of comedy to it, because they've been waiting to go at each other like this. And so Louis, talks about, and it was fucked up of Louis to do this, of talking about Armand's maker and how he groomed him to be, and then Armand comes back and he's talking about Paul, Louis' brother, talking about how his sister buried him alive. He talks about, Claudia, and Armand clocks Louis so bad. Oh, he clocked Louis so bad. He said, Claudia, my daughter was my sister, was my throw pillow. Ooh. Catch it. Louis Dupont de Lot, dead weight. Catch it. In that moment, you had to. I'm so sorry. Y'all are upset with me when I said it, but there we go. My daughter was my sister, was my throw pillow. Oh my God. And then Armand just starts laying into Louis, and it's just like, at one point he's just like, it's all Lestat. And then a little bit of Claudia, you throw in Claudia's name for cover, but then it goes right back to Lestat. And then he's just like, Louis is just like, I loved her. I loved Claudia. And Armand just throws back the jab of all jabs, being like, but she didn't love you, not like I do, not like Lestat did. Like, basically, leave it alone. And this kind of sends Louis into a spiral where he's just like, thank you for saying that. Like, I'm remembering now Paris, and I can hear her, she's calling me. And then he leaves the room. And I got a theory on this, because later in the episode, it is established that Armand gave Daniel a false memory, and Daniel carried that as his truth for years and years and years, up until present day, pretty much. And so in my mind, it must be some type of like trigger word or something that like triggers those things. So I wonder if Armand, in a sense of protecting himself from Louis' inevitable wrath with what will happen to Claudia, told Louis, like, basically subdued him. It was just like, Claudia never loved you, so the things that happened to her at the end of the day, like, don't beat yourself up about it because she never loved you. I think Armand was like fucking with Louis in that moment, to be honest. Like, he was being, first of all, fully hateful, and second of all, I feel like he must have done something to the point where Louis, like, he's just like, okay, thank you for telling me that. I need to, I hear her calling me, and then he rushes out of the room. Just a theory. Daniel begins to probe Louis about like what happens when he runs out of the room. And Louis is like trying to remember, and Daniel, he keeps kind of like pushing him and pushing him and pushing him to be like, something happened. What happened, Louis? And what happened was Louis walked into the sun after hearing Armand say that Claudia didn't love him. He walked into the sun. Now I want to take a pause. This is where I'm going to tell you, like I said in the last episode, if I hated Louis, you would know. I can never hate Louis because his love for Claudia, he did have a lot of love for Claudia. Did he treat her right in every single situation? No, not all the time. But I never questioned whether he loved Claudia. I never really questioned whether any of these characters love each other. But love in vampire lore has a very funny function. You know, it's just like humans, I guess, in a way too, where someone can love you but also can wrong you in the next breath. You know, like someone can love you but not like you. Someone can love you but not have your best interest at heart. And all of these dynamics within these characters display that very notion that you can have love, but the other kind of ensuing feelings from it may not always be connected to it, you know? So this is a scenario where Louis loved Claudia. And you know that he loved Claudia. And it's obviously a deep hurt that he's experiencing in hearing that she didn't love him, which is not true. I think Claudia very much so loved Louis. But it's like I said, you can love someone and sometimes not like him. You can love someone and do something that may wrong them. You can love someone and experience a lot of other emotions beyond love or beyond any other positive emotions. That's a running theme in this show. Okay, like that is a motif that you gotta pick up on and keep with it. You know, it's not this harsh binary of this or that. It is a real spectrum of emotions that all of these characters are experiencing, and within that come a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of flaws, a lot of things that do not make sense. But that is what these characters are. They're not infallible creatures at all. Like, they're not one way all the time. It's like what I said last week. In one scene, they'll do one thing, and then the next scene, they'll do another thing. That's just kind of what the show, and I think the franchise as a whole, has always tried to do in showing the inconsistencies of these monsters who are, as they said in previous episode, the most human monsters. That kind of serves as a mirror back to us, because these monsters look like us. They act like us in a lot of ways. So what does that say about us? Okay, unpausing. Let's continue. In doing that probing, Louis realizes he remembers walking into the sun, and Armand basically pulls him out and saves him. So Louis is now writhing in bed in agonizing pain. And I just want to call out that the SFX work, the makeup, and like everything of Louis post going into the sun looked incredible. Oh my gosh, the makeup team on this show ate down, because Louis looked completely different. Like, it was an insane amount of detail. From, it's basically his whole head and his whole torso, body, arms, hands, like, and there's a lot of detail just baked into every bit of his body. It's insane work. Phenomenal SFX work by the makeup team on the show. Ridiculously good. Wow. I don't know if I can put it here, but if you've seen it, you know, insane. So now we're introduced to Louis and Daniel really working together as a team to piece together these memories that they've lost. So Louis is in bed, he's writhing in pain. Daniel is outside in a trance state put in by Armand. And so Armand is talking to Louis, and Louis is just like, I'm sorry for doing this. And Armand is just like, sorry, such a meaningless word. And he's being just really just downright nasty and despicable to Louis. Of course, there is the understanding, like I said, of like, that could explain why Armand is thinking the way that he does. It doesn't excuse the way that he's acting, which is horrendous, but you understand why he's thinking the way that he is. You know, it's this idea again of this just relentless chase for love and loyalty, and this overextending that he's doing to a certain degree. And he, you know, talks about it later in the episode. He talks about, you know, this prison of empathy that you feel like I've locked you in. Like, he's, I think, aware of the ways in which he's kind of bent over backwards for Louis, but a lot of the times wasn't always necessary, you know, and that comes from him being from a very broken place. Like, all of these characters are incredibly broken, you know, and they are trying to piece themselves together. And when I was watching it last night and talking about it, I was saying that Louis and Armand need something that neither can provide to each other. Like, they both have needs that the other cannot meet, and that will forever cause friction between them, because they think that they're doing what the other needs, but it may not always be that. And in this case, Armand is just like, he's disgusted with Louis. Like, yes, he saved him, he did a heroic act of saving him, but he's disgusted with him at this point. He's torturing Daniel in the background and like dropping him to the floor with his mind. Like, it's getting bad. So then Armand goes and directs his attention away from Louis and goes to Daniel. And at this point, this is the first time they've really interacted in this episode, because when Armand comes into the room, he gets Louis off of Daniel and like throws Daniel to the wall, but he never addresses Daniel, mainly because Daniel was like bleeding out. But he now addresses Daniel. He's just like, I'm Armand. We met at the bar with Louis. Yeah. So I read the tape. I listened to the tapes, and basically Armand arrests Daniel's body. Like, he has control over Daniel's body, and Daniel can't feel his own body. And Armand is like interrogating him at this point, and he's just like, you know, like digging through his life pretty much. And he keeps repeating the phrase, is that what makes you fascinating? And it is Armand detonating, because Louise said, you are boring. He's fascinating to me. Like, you are not fascinating. You are boring. And so Armand is replaying that over and over and over in his mind. And he's just like, you're going to teach me how to be fascinating, since he was able to open up to you and talk to you, and he finds you so fascinating. You're going to teach me how to do it. And I was like, whoa, insane. First of all, also want to take another pause and talk about the fact that this show's season 2 of the show is not eligible for this year's Emmys, which is a travesty, because I cannot fathom how, if it were eligible, how Assad, who plays Armand, does not get a Best Supporting Actor in a drama nomination. His performance in this episode, I've talked about his performances in other episodes as well, but this episode there was some insane work being done. Because in last week's episode, I talked about how Armand has this ability to be really contained and be very, you know, quiet and kind of stoic. But this was an episode where he let it all out. And apparently this was Assad's first day of shooting, which is insane. Like, these were the first scenes he shot for the season. That's insane. Armand is now in the middle of this interrogation. Daniel is freaking out because he just wants to get out of this situation. He's just like, you know, like, I can be on my knees in a second, like, you know, but whatever you want. He is just like, let me go, pretty much. And this is when Armand starts laying into him with the bartering with desire. Like, is that what makes you fascinating? And he goes and gets Daniel's tapes that he's had from previous interviews with other people, and he starts unraveling the tape, and it's just like, facing truth, is that what makes you fascinating? Like, he's reading him and being like, all these menial things about you, that's what makes you fascinating? Like, that's what Louis wanted? You know, that's what Louis wanted, but I couldn't provide him? Like, he's furious. Like, Armand is angry with Daniel when really he's angry with Louis. He is like maybe I should tell my story, whatever it is. So Daniel is just like, no, you're the fascinating one, you're the interesting one, kind of trying to, I guess, distract him and be like, maybe if he tells his story, then he will not torture me anymore. And so he gets started, and Armand is just like, my first memory, and he goes into kind of the beginning of what his origin story was in episode 4, and then he's just like, my second memory, and then he doesn't say anything, and he's just like, I'll think on it more, and doesn't say pretty much anything from that, and it kind of leaves Daniel lying in this like his body being arrested state. It prompted me to think about the idea of, what do vampires do with misery and guilt and all these things from their human life? Like, do they carry it over? Do they abandon it? I think there's a spectrum here. Like, you either have a Lestat who kind of, it's just like, the human version of me was the weakest version of me. I'm, like the HBIC of this thing. Like, this is new life, new me type of thing. And he kind of doesn't do a lot of looking back to what his human life was. Like, he's always pressing forward. We got eternity, baby. Like, that's his MO. And Armand is kind of the opposite, where he does do a lot of languishing in his prior life. But both of them keep a distance from their real emotions. Like, both Lestat and Armand have a real, like, arm's length away from the true depth of their emotions, in a way, to the point where it causes them to behave in the ways that they behave in their own unique ways. Like, it causes this, like, this buildup that ultimately has this less than desirable outcome. So then it comes back to the present day, and Daniel's just like, Louis, fuck your boyfriend for torturing me. Did not like that. I think Louis is slowly coming to the realization that Armand has done so much to him that he just has not been cognizant of. And that's really, like, he's having to deal with the ramifications of that in real time while he's talking to Daniel and uncovering more of these memories. So they're doing more remembering together, and Daniel, like, has another kind of like memory of how long they kept him there. And then we see a cut, and Louis takes Daniel to the little rocks, and he tells him to put his feet in. And I guess it's like a grounding thing to help Daniel, like, remember. And I was like, oh, they're so friends. They're so best friend coded. Like, I really liked Louis and Daniel in this dynamic in this episode. My mutual said something that was so funny, which was like, oh my God, they're unionizing. And they are. They are now unionizing against Armand. I think there's a good balance there that you don't get with Louis and Armand, that you don't really get with Louis and Lestat. Like, Louis and Daniel kind of have an understanding of each other, like they've got a thing going on. They're here, We cut back to San Francisco, and so Armand is going back to Louis now, and he's basically being like, I listened to all the tapes that you and Daniel recorded. It was a lot of Lestat, mostly Lestat, a little bit of Claudia, but then it goes back to Lestat. And these are the people who occupy the most space in Louis' mind, and to Armand take up the most space to where Armand doesn't have anywhere to be in Louis' mind. Like, they preoccupy so much of Louis' existence and just so much of who Louis is that Armand is just like, they take up too much space to where there's no space for me. Armand is just like, Louis, if you wanted out of this prison of either sympathy or empathy that I've locked you in, all you had to do was say it, and then he's just like, in my last act of service before I leave you to yourself, basically being like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. I'll never preoccupy as much space in your mind as you do in mine. He's just like, I know where Lestat is, pretty much. Like, I know where he is, and I've gotten in contact with him, and I can talk to him for you. And so he reaches out to Lestat. He does like a brain call out to Lestat, and he is told Lestat that Louis is sick, And he doesn't really give him the specifics, obviously, but he calls Lestat, and Louis is saying like, no, 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 no. And then Armand's just like, I am the voice of your maker. Like, this is your chance, Louis. Like, say what you want to say to Lestat. And Lestat is saying, you know, like, Louis, mon cher, why are you sick? Why are you ill? Like, what happened to you? And then he says, like, Louis, I love you. And then he's like, Armand, tell him I love him. And Armand has been parroting back everything that Lestat is saying, pretty much. Like, when Lestat says, like, why are you sick? Who harmed you? Armand says, why are you sick? Who harmed you? To Louis. But Armand will not say, I love you, Louis, from Lestat. He won't do it. He will not do it. When it gets to that point in the little mental phone call, Armand is like,
hang up on you. Not in the mood.
And does not, like, he does not say, I love you at all. Like, he will not say, I love you to Louis from Lestat. And I feel like there are so many ways to read that. Like, he won't say it because obviously the most obvious is just like, I'm not going to relay your ex-boyfriend, who really is still your current boyfriend's love, through me to you. I'm not going to do that. But then also you have to consider the aspect that Armand and Lestat used to be a thing. Like, Armand's retelling does have Lestat saying, I love you, but, you know, who knows if that was actually something that Lestat actually said. So he's like feeling all these things. He's hearing Lestat say, I love you to Louis, but he might not have ever said it to Armand. He's hearing Lestat say, I love you to Louis, and him and Louis and Armand are together. So he's like, I don't want to relay that I love you to him. Like, there are so many layers to Armand's choice to not relay Lestat saying, I love you to Louis. And then meanwhile, you got Louis in the coffin, burnt up in agonizing pain, being like, you know, no, 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 no. And there's a lot of ways I think you can read his no's too. I read it personally as it being apprehension. You know, like, Louis got this, and we're missing a lot of context of like when the last time Louis saw Lestat was, like, because we haven't gone back to Paris, so there's a chance that Lestat and he will probably show back up in Paris. So like, when was the last time they might have talked? When was the last time they might have seen each other? Like, I feel like there's apprehension from Louis' end, where he's just like, you know, how do you pick back up with a person like this, where you had such a tumultuous dynamic in the way that we did, but I do still harbor this longing for you. Like, I still have this longing for you. Like, in what realm does this relationship exist? Like, how do we move with each other, pretty much? Then you also have the layer of like, there could be apprehension from maybe not a full place of fear, but a place of like, he doesn't know how Lestat is maybe going to respond to him. And also, like, he could be afraid of falling into another thing with Lestat, where he kind of loses himself again, and where he loses his sense of kind of the world and the reality around him, which proved to be a bit dangerous the last time. Like, there's a lot of aspects of even his relationship with Lestat where he would be on his guard of wanting to go back into that thing again. Like, there are so many reasons why he was saying no. And I do get, you know, like, because the problem is that I think a lot of people, when they were discoursing about this specific scene, they were like, how are you guys not reading that, like, Lestat loves him, Louis loves him, like, you know, this was a romantic moment. But like, Lestat, we can hear in Armand's mind this really tender sound and like this really tender delivery that Lestat is giving of what he's saying. But Louis can't hear that. He just hears Armand saying the words. So like, Louis doesn't really know the inflection of these things. He doesn't know the tone. He doesn't know kind of where Lestat may be coming from with all of this. Like, there's a lot of things that are lost in translation in a way. So like, you could very much so, I guess, read that as romantic, but we're hearing Lestat's inflection and tone and all that stuff, but Louis is not. So that air of apprehension that Louis has also makes a lot of sense. Like, he has a lot of reason to be a bit on his guard with hearing that Lestat is out there. And Armand brings up a good point, which is that he's like, you know, oh, did you get lost in a fantasy of doing this interview to knowingly provoke Lestat so that he would buy the book and he would read it and come chasing after you. There's some validity to that, because I feel like Louis wanted him to do that. Like, Louis was, when it was just him and Daniel talking, Louis would like yell down at the tape recorder when he was meaning to say things that were like he was trying to obviously bite at Lestat when he was talking about like how he loved music but he played it with no feeling. You know, like that was a jab that he wanted Lestat to hear, and he wanted that inflection to be known of how he intended for it to be translated, so that when it made it to the book, if Lestat read it, he would know like kind of how Louis felt. And so it got me thinking, like, this book is Louis' come to me. Like, from season 1, when Lestat wrote that song and he did it with someone else singing, I think it was Antoinette singing, but the scene where Louis like swims like across a river to get to Lestat, barges in Antoinette's house, kicks her out of her own house. Lestat is like, like, he's like, oh my God, you came, like you showed up and listened to my song. This interview, which will lead to this book, is Louis' version of that. Like, there's a bit of him he does want Lestat to see it and to read it and to know all the things that he feels about him and maybe come after him and find him again. Who knows? So it basically ends with Armand being like, hang up on you, not in the mood. I'm not telling him that. Like, I'm not telling him I love him. From you to him, not doing it. And so then Armand gets into, like, once he hangs up on Lestat mentally, he then is just like, you know, have I not atoned for my part of Paris? Have I not moved an inch forward? And I would be like, kind of, no, a little bit. Like, you could have stopped probably what will inevitably happen in Paris. So no, you haven't atoned, Armand, okay? At all, in fact. Like, I think, you know, for all of the things that I have gotten on Louis for, he will never forgive Armand for not protecting Claudia as well from what will inevitably happen to her. Like, I don't think he will never forgive him for that. So he's like, you know, have I not atoned? Have I not moved forward an inch? It's like, no, baby, you have not. Like, at all. Like, you have not moved forward. You are very much so unatoned at this point in time. And you won't be moving forward anytime soon. Yeah. This is, you messed up. And he will never forgive you for that. So he's just like, okay, well, done with this. And goes back into the room where Daniel is. And Daniel is basically, like, they both deduce that Armand keeps saying rest to both of them. He just will say, like, rest. And I think that is his word to get people to kind of either fall into a hypnotic state or into a trance, or basically to get control of their body. He just says rest. And so he tells Daniel, you know, rest, and he like has Daniel at the table, and he's basically just telling him, you know, like, you know, your life will really never amount to much of anything. Like, you'll just go and be an alcoholic dad, just like your dad. You'll marry a woman who's just like your mother, who is, you know, high on pills all the time, and you'll have kids who resent you, and you don't really have anything going for you. Let me do this. Let me kill you. It'll feel like a bath. You'll have that sweet release. And he keeps saying rest. And then he finally gets to the end of it, of what he's saying to Daniel. And then at this point, Daniel now says, rest. Like, I'll finally have rest. And so then Armand goes in to bite him. And essentially, he's like, I'm going to kill Daniel in that moment. And so then it cuts to Daniel and Louis in present day. That's when they figure out, okay, he says rest when he's trying to get us to do something. So let's dig deep and see, like, let's riffle through our memories and see kind of what we're missing in this moment. And also in the middle of that monologue, Daniel says, you know, when Armand's basically being like, you'll never really amount to anything, your life is nothing, whatever. Daniel's just like, I'm a bright young reporter with a point of view. And you can tell that he's saying it because it's like a mantra that he said or has been given or someone told him. And we'll get back to that. And so then Louis comes out and he's just like, Armand, basically, stop this, spare him. He's like, I keep this one alive as a symbol of our companionship, something. And I saw a tweet being like, Louis, Armand didn't even believe that. You want to keep Daniel alive as a symbol of your relationship? Okay. And I was like, yeah, Louis, I love where your head is at. And I do love the sentiment because Daniel is alive, but the reasoning, it needs a little bit more work. It needs just a little bit more work. So then this is when we get back into, again, at the end of the episode, the like Matre Arun thing. So Armand is just like, are you asking Matre? And and Louis is just like, no, I'm telling you, Arun. And I was like, oh, brother. But basically he was exercising some of his control. Louis was exercising some of his control and being like, spare Daniel, let him go. And Armand not happy about that, and he like storms off. So we cut back to Daniel and Louis, and Daniel like leaves the room really quick and then comes back, and he has a book, and it's his book. I think like his autobiography, one of the books that he's written about his life, and he's reading a passage about something that this guy in a drug den told him, and he carried it with him for the rest of his life. And he basically is doing that to tell Louis that he remembers like someone telling him this a long time ago. And then he was just like, and the guy said it to me in the den, and then he Richard Pryored himself, so he like lit himself on fire. And he was like, I watched the guy burn for a while, but the weirdest thing is when I remember it, he was already burnt up. And then Daniel realizes that was Louis. So when Armand leaves, Louis comes in and comforts Daniel, and we can see him beginning to say something to him. And so the words that he was telling Louis is just like, basically always remember that you're a bright young journalist with a point of view. And Daniel always remembered that. He always carried those words that Louis told him for the rest of his life. Like he always had that in his mind. And it was like a really tender moment of Daniel realizing that Louis has always kind of imparted this wisdom to Daniel that he's carried with him for the remainder of his career. He's just like, I messed up 2 marriages. I messed up 2 kids, and I wasn't a good dad, but I was always a journalist. Like I never got too down in the dumps. I never got too high to be a journalist. I could always do that job. And it was basically because Louis gave him these words that played like a song over and over in his head. Anytime things got bad, he would remember, I'm a bright young journalist with a point of view. And I was just like, that's just so sweet. It was just a very, very tender moment between Louis and Daniel. And really this whole episode is just these two coming together, unionizing against Armand, and also really having a real sense of friendship with each other. Because in the talkback, Eric Bogosian says something which is hilarious, where he's just like, Daniel doesn't have friends and Louis doesn't have friends, but in each other in this episode, they find that they're friends. They found friendship within each other, and maybe something more, but they found friendship in each other, and it's meaningful. Like there's a really, I think, an understanding of each other that they have, and a respect of each other too. And then this whole experience of piecing together their memories has done that for them. And it's just this really, I think, beautiful thing. Like it's a really gorgeous thing, a good moment of tenderness in this show. And especially in this episode where there's a lot of just nastiness from Armand. This is the last scene in the show, and Louis tells Daniel, like, I think we gave you more drugs and we kind of just, dropped you off. And that explains the surveillance photos of them like walking an unconscious Daniel like down and leaving him somewhere. And before that, Armand basically tells Daniel this lie that he remembers, like, you blacked out, you woke up in a drug den. Like that's that's the story. Like, that's the truth. You don't remember anything that happened here. And Louis, again, ever the tender heart, he says, like, we did this, like, we gave you drugs. Like, he doesn't run away from responsibility in that moment, which is a really, I've dogged him for doing it in other situations, but he did it in this situation. He was just like, no, we gave you more drugs, we fed you this lie, all these things. Like, he assumes responsibility for it, which was a really, I think, cool thing that he did in that moment. But then they leave him pretty much, and that's kind of the end of that. And also after they have that moment of clarity and Louis assumes responsibility for what happened, Daniel puts together the pieces of, like, Armand basically thawed my brain, he redacted himself from the story, hence why I didn't recognize him, and completely manipulated both of our brains. Like, there is a moment where, and I think Louis is, like, still trying to make excuses for Armand, not in a bad way. I think he's just kind of been conditioned to do that. But he has a moment where he's just like, well, these are the things that happened to me, but, like, Armand definitely messed with your memories. This is when Louis says, I was fragile, I was an invalid, like, of course I don't remember. But Daniel's trying to, like, embolden him and be like, no, we both forgot or don't have memories that cut off at the exact same place. That is not a coincidence. Like, we both just didn't forget this day at the exact same place for no reason. Armand did something to both of us. He manipulated both of our minds. Like, you're a victim is what Daniel was saying, like, in this moment. And I think that is what kind of, like, revives Louis to be like, oh shit, you're right. You're absolutely right. Like, now I'm pissed. And so we cut back to Daniel and Louis in present day. And Armand has now come back from his lunch endeavor of chasing the crypto bro guy. And he's like, comes in, he's got his little jacket on, he's wearing the guy's sunglasses. Like, he is thinking, like, oh, I've had a good day, I had a good meal. What are y'all doing? And he comes back and he's just like, how was Paris? I was talking about Paris. And Louis is just like, yeah, we didn't talk about Paris, we talked about San Francisco. Yeah, Daniel asks what happened with that. And then Armand parrots back exactly what Louis said at the beginning of the episode, where he was just like,
I could see you were partial to him. I preserve your happiness even when you don't or can't. I had a hunch Daniel might prove fruitful in later times.
Meaning that Armand must have done the same thing he did to Daniel, which was telling him, like, you blacked out, you woke up in a drug den. He must have done the same thing to Louis. The exact same thing. Told him, like, I preserve your happiness when you can't or you don't. Like, I do all of those things. I told you this, I told you that. And then Louis just absorbs it as his own truth. That is Armand's wheelings and dealings in this whole ordeal. Like, insane stuff. And then that's the end of the episode. This episode was just so good. Oh my god, this episode was just so good, because it also further reinforces the kind of challengers thing that this show really has going, which is that this show has a rule of threes thing going. At any given point, it is a three-way, tennis match happening with these characters. So it was Lestat, Louis, and Claudia, or Lestat, Louis, and Armand, or in this episode, Louis, Armand, and Daniel. Like, there's always this trifecta that the show has that all, like, are equally important, and they all work together to achieve the narrative. And it was just really, really great. I like that it was, like, they said in the talkback that it was kind of like a play. Like, it was a kind of a smaller set piece, which is very different from the season. Kind of calls back to season 1, where we're only on one set, we're only kind of in one location, like they're just in that apartment pretty much, and then it cuts back to them in Dubai, but like it's pretty much this one room that they're in doing this, and it is just so good. It allows you to really strip down the show to its best bits, which are the performances and the writing. Everybody was firing on all cylinders. Casting, shout out to the casting, okay? because the casting of young Daniel, insane work. Just not only does he look like him, I think his name is Luke, acted like older Daniel to a T. So good. So good. I love this episode. I thought it was really great. And now I am nervous because we're going to cut back to Paris next week. And I know where we're heading, and I don't want to go. I'm already putting on my Claudia defense hat, and I will be fighting for her and defending her until this whole shebang is done. So buckle up if that's going to be a problem for you. I hope you enjoyed this week's video. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. So be sure to like and subscribe and do all of that jazz, and let me know what you thought of this episode and kind of like how you're feeling now that we're a little bit over to the halfway point of the season. It feels crazy that we've been doing this for 5 weeks at this point, but I've been having a really fun time with y'all, rocking and rolling, hearing everything that you have to say about the show. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro yet, but I'll see you next week.